This program includes graphic special effects. Parental discretion is advised.
One of the reasons why horror fiction, fantasy fiction, science fiction is so exciting is because they stimulate the imagination in new directions. I like the idea that the world is mysterious and full of magic, good and bad. And I like the idea that in telling these kinds of stories, maybe you alert the audience to the fact that that's the case.
Clive Barker. Some of you may have heard his name, but you may know him best based on his works in the horror genre, in books and film, birthing horror icons such as Pinhead and Candyman, to name a few. I've been a fan of his twisted vision on storytelling and his first two Hellraiser films, alongside Nightbreed and The Midnight Meat Train. So it's safe to say I'll most likely talk about his other works in the near future. But as of now, I feel like covering a less known film of his, one with ambitious attempt at merging 40s noir with 90s horror, Lord of Illusions. Now, it's not the best cult movie ever made, but it's certainly one of the weirdest around. Continuing his grotesque imagination, Barker seems to have much to say or prove with this horror picture. What I found the most engaging in the whole film is the main villain, Nyx, who is a sorcerer dealing with black magic. But sadly, we only get a small time frame with him, which ultimately helps make him one of the most creepy baddies in the genre. I felt like he was a good subject as any to talk about, and the craziness of this movie. But before we get to him, I thought I'd discuss the movie and its creation. So with that being said, let's see how terrifying these illusions can become. Lord of Illusions is a, get this, neo-noir supernatural horror film, which sounds badass. Written and directed by Clive Barker, it was based on his short story, The Last Illusion, in his Books of Blood Anthology, Volume 6. It was filmed in Los Angeles and in the Mojave Desert in Arizona. It stars Scott Bakula, Kevin J. O'Connor, Famke Janssen, and Daniel Von Bargen. The story follows Detective Harry D'Amour, who's dealt with supernatural occurrences in his past, stumbles into a world of dark magic, with a cult raising its evil leader from the dead, killed by his once acolyte turned stage magician, Philip Swan.
I've got so much power to give you, Swan. All you have to do is beg.
It's up to D'Amour and Swan to stop the resurrection, and presumably the end of the world. The movie, though adapted from Barker's short story, is written different from one another, with the film having a new plot and completely new villain. In the original short story, the character, Butterfield, is the main villain instead of being a henchman like in the film. He's more a demon and human disguised based on the literature compared to the film, which he proves to be persistent, but nonetheless is weaker. Barker's reason behind the story idea was, in his own words, "I've always loved illusionists. There's a dark side, and illusionists present them to you. It's very much life and death illusion. You sawed the woman in half, but she's still alive. They're presented as breezy, funny, entertaining pieces, but subtextually, they're stories of death and resurrection." He thought horror movies at the time didn't explore magic enough, and the Hellraiser movies had run their course, which is why he focused on this movie. Barker's intention was to make a series around the character with an action hero in the horror genre, describing it as taking a little leap from Die Hard or Indiana Jones and transferring it into horror. Enter D'Amour, who he thought was a perfect character to tackle these sort of supernatural horror elements. The character stems from the director's short stories and has made appearances since then in Boom Comics and recently The Scarlet Gospels, both involving the world of Hellraiser.
The box. You opened it. We came.
The casting of Bakula as D'Amour was met with a mixed response from fans. Barker, however, considered him as perfectly casted for the role, and I'm going to have to agree. Not saying I'm not a fan of Quantum Leap, but I thought the actor had the right rugged personality, down on his luck, sort of cop cliche. It fit the theme of the character based on the 40s pulp heroes. With translating the character and story, Barker said, "This movie isn't a homage to the 40s noir. We're just focusing on this everyman who is drawn into the heart of darkness over and over again because of some karmic thing which he had no power over." Bakula worked on his version of D'Amour, citing to still make him more fresh and relevant to the situations presented by Clive.
Harry is a man who, and I will quote Clive because I told him that I would when he told me this, he has a karmic debt, which I like a lot. And his karmic debt in this lifetime, in this time through, is to basically be an envoy, if you will, or the leader and the man who stands in between the forces of darkness and the forces of good and light.
He even added the weird-looking tattoo on his back. The movie eventually became a tired endeavor to Barker, who was completely exhausted throughout the shoot, visiting up to 3 sets daily. The author has a known history of pushing boundaries with entertainment and studio companies. On seeing Barker's cut of the film, MGM decided that it was too long and there was too much time spent on dialogue that occurred in between scenes involving death or horror elements. Roughly 12.5 minutes were cut out of this theatrical release. Barker later commented, "It's not 12.5 minutes of blood and gore that was removed. It's actually the thematic guts of the movie." He further adds that MGM wanted him to take out the detective elements, which he simply replied, "No!" He later explains on his stance, part of the point of the movie is that it's genre breaking. It moves from noir to horror and back and forth, and that's what makes the movie work. The scenes were later added into the director's cut of the film, including scenes with D'Amour and Swan discussing Nick's power, teachings, and goals, which would have explained the movie better. The film proved challenging to sell, as the producers and test audiences were mixed about it. Barker thought audiences were used to 90 minutes compared to the 104 runtime of the movie. He was surprised to see the audience react horrified to the cult stuff, which we will cover shortly. Overall, the film seemed to gain mostly mixed reviews after its release, with the reception growing rather warm since. I found it as another fun and weird experience from Barker, but it did suffer from some weak writing, mainly on D'Amour and his role in the film. He felt like a character made strictly for the audience to gather information. We feel stuck with him, while the interesting stuff happens off screen. Though I appreciate the character, I felt the story fizzled with him involved. The last act definitely saves the film, which started out very aimless and all over the place. It has its silly moments.
Did you see it?
But I still enjoyed it, and that can be attributed to the creepy character of Nyx. Besides talking about the film, he was my main focus on the subject. So let's talk about this dark sorcerer and his obedient cult.
Touch the darkness. He's been waiting for you.
Let's start off by saying there's not much difference from this film's cult compared to other movies. They're for the most part pretty strange and hilarious. But there's this creepy essence about them. And like I keep mentioning through this video, stems from one source, Nyx. Barker explains his conception for the character. Halfway through shooting this picture, somebody came in with a newspaper with a headline about mass deaths in a cult in Switzerland, the Order of the Solar Temple. I don't think we even yet know quite what happened here. The craziness of Waco, the craziness of Jonestown, the Manson stuff. Nyx is the embodiment of the charismatic leader who says, "Follow me to death," which is something that's part of our culture. So I thought, supposing we had a villain like that, but instead of this guy just being somebody who can weave words and make promises, he generally has a greater power. That, to me, is scary and interesting.
Will, I am not your shepherd.
He also said in a different interview, One of the things I wanted to do with Nix was to make him very uncharismatic. There's nothing appealing about this man, and towards the end of the movie, when the temptation would be to go into apocalyptic mode, the movie pulls in exactly the opposite direction. Nix becomes this frail, rather pathetic creature. In one of the final scenes, Dorothea asks the metaphysical question.
What the fuck are you?
A man who wanted to be a god, then changed his mind.
And I like that. I like the fact that he is just a man. He wanted to be something more, but he gave up on his useless endeavors. He's murdered all his acolytes, his devotees, and now he's alone in the dark. I actively went after that, even though it was flying in the face of what the audience expects. Looking into the character, I didn't find much about his past or the origin of his powers. So if I've missed anything, please comment below. I'm very interested. All I was able to find out close to his beginnings comes from his title, The Puritan, which in a simple definition for the film is a person who practices, preaches, or follows a stricter moral code than most people. He has called this because of a strange fire that chose him for a crusade to cleanse the world.
And the fire said to me, you are my instrument. You shall be known as the Puritan.
An illusion, you think, or reality? However he was given these powers, it must have been from something immensely powerful, as when he's fatally wounded, he seems to regain from them pretty quick, not dying. He is instead imprisoned in this gnarly-looking iron mask, made to bind him and his dark magic. The mask design was based on a similar-looking one worn by Barbara Steele in Black Sunday. And if that's not enough to show you how resilient this warlock chump is, then maybe when Swan declares that they will bury him so deep that no one will ever find him, and even when Nix's body is found 13 years later, he still possesses a great amount of power as a carcass, even while being bound. Just before his death, he gives a piece of this power to Swan, as he believed he was the only one who could harness it with him.
Only Swan is worthy. You just waited like lambs.
The transference shows Swan what Nix calls flesh with God's eyes. This shows to alter perception and the raw true meaning of existence. I feel this move weakened Nix enough to be taken down early in the film. Nix shows a vast set of his abilities, but his most dangerous one is to get into people's minds and project mental images bordering on the line of reality and illusions, a power he eventually uses as his main tool to torture.
Tell me where she is and I'll make it go away.
What's also fascinating about Nix is his shift of goals before and after his demise. As when he was alive, it was to simply cleanse the earth and become a god himself. But when he is resurrected, comes across more cynical and discards his previous beliefs, claiming he was born to murder the world, to kill everything and be alone in the eternal darkness of space until the end of time.
I'm going to show the world was waiting at the end.
Without mercy, he sacrifices his followers to fulfill his rebirth, only sparing Swan, as he is the only one worth his wisdom. Swan has looked into the abyss. We're not really told what the abyss is, just that Swan looked at it the way Nix looked at it, which, to sum up, must be terrifying if it forced a so-called Puritan to rethink his own holy mission. The later design of Undead Nix is so uncomfortably creepy, with the iron mask outline embedded onto his skull, where it restrained his magic. His mannerisms are eerily otherworldly, and this could be brought on by the great job by actor Daniel von Vargen, who sadly passed back in 2015. I liked his work in both Seinfeld and Malcolm in the Middle, so it was jarring to see him play a villain of this caliber. Barker says when he met the actor in New York, he told him he wanted him for the part, with the actor being very hesitant, saying, "I don't think I can do this. It's a very dark role, and I think I'm going to find it difficult to enter into this drama and not end up feeling like I'm drowning in it."
Nix's plan, if you will, involved getting Swan into him in the beginning, and that plan doesn't work. But as far as, the second coming, as it were, of Nix, I think if he has a plan, I'm not sure, he knew is now I get released or whatever. It probably was a surprise to him as well.
What's it going to be? Fire to burn out your eyes.
Barker said after, once Daniel came on set as Nix, surrounded by his cultists in his huge set, surrounded by death and destruction, it was damn near impossible not to feel it. The actor embodies this depressed God theme, which sets a chilling atmosphere.
But I'm on my own. We're all on our own.
Bargan saw the character as a renegade evil spirit when resurrected from the abyss. Still Nix, but not quite. He was meddling with such a dark power with unknown origins that it eventually made him into almost, if not, a god. The film barely made its budget back in theaters, and since its release has gained a small cult status among other of Barker's work. The film, if it was a success, was to feature more of D'Amour and other adaptations of the author's work. But sadly, this never happened, and I'm not positive if they would have followed any more on Nix's story, which I'm sure could be endless possibilities in Clive's imagination to keep him returning. Barker wanted to push the envelope with this movie, and in some aspects, he did. I think Nix was terrifying, and the idea of this dark magic was very intriguing. I just wish the rest of the film matched that same energy, but nonetheless is a good movie and one I've enjoyed talking about. So if you see it on any free streaming services, give it a watch. It was fun doing research on this and on the character of Nix. I hope you enjoyed, and have a great day.
Flesh is a trap.